In the first part of our documentary, we witnessed how the dark plan of Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold began to take shape, and how an ordinary day at Columbine High School turned into a nightmare. But the events we will discuss now are the most terrifying part of this tragedy. While many students and teachers were hiding inside the library, Harris and Klebold were approaching. On the other end of the emergency call, the dispatchers could do nothing but listen to the screams, gunshots, and the fear experienced by the victims at that very moment. What really happened inside the library? How did some of the students survive? And how did one of the most devastating school shootings in American history end? Let's find out as the story continues. But before we begin, if you're new to our channel, make sure to subscribe so you'll always be updated with videos like this. The following minutes became the most brutal and terrifying part of the entire attack. Inside the library, the students had nowhere left to run. Many hid under the tables, holding hands tightly while whispering prayers and hoping they wouldn't be noticed. Others, after being injured, were forced to pretend to be dead in order to have a chance to survive. According to one survivor, when he looked behind him, he saw one of the perpetrators kneeling and aiming a weapon at a student who was hiding behind him. The armed man was very close. He knew that the student had no protection to rely on. Because of this, he turned around and covered his ears, thinking he would be the next to be attacked. Only a few moments passed. The student hiding behind him was attacked and killed. Then the assailant turned the weapon on him. He still remembers the sound of the gunshot hitting his body while the armed man was just a few feet away. Inside the room, fear and confusion quickly spread. Everyone was desperately looking for a way to stay out of sight. Within just a few minutes, 10 students lost their lives inside the library. Many more were seriously injured.
There has been a terrible shooting at a high school in Littleton, Colorado. Because the situation, as I left to come out here, apparently is ongoing, I think it would be inappropriate for me to say anything other than I hope the American people will be praying for the students, the parents, and the teachers. And we'll wait for events to unfold, and then there'll be more to say.
As the tragedy was happening, the news started to spread across the country. Reports emerged about a horrific attack at a high school in Littleton, Colorado. Even government officials gave brief statements, calling on all of America to pray for the students, parents, and teachers as the situation continued to unfold. 11:30 in the morning. While the attack continued inside the library, police arrived at Columbine High School and began to secure the campus perimeter. From outside the building, they could clearly hear gunshots coming from the library. The perpetrators were still inside and were only a few meters away from the officers outside. While the authorities were gathering information, a student who managed to escape provided a very important detail. He recognized one of the perpetrators. According to him, it was a senior student of Columbine High School named Eric Harris, 18 years old. The police immediately conducted a background check. The result caused great concern. Harris already had a previous police record, and in his file, another name also appeared, Dylan Klebold, 17 years old. As more students managed to escape from the school, their testimonies began to match. A clear picture of what was happening gradually emerged. The perpetrators were not strangers or armed people from outside. They were students known to the school, young people who had been studying at Columbine for a long time. And it was clear that they carried out the attack that shook all of America together. Meanwhile, while the police were preparing for a deeper operation inside the building, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold went back to the cafeteria. Later footage from the security cameras showed that Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold fired at some bags left inside the cafeteria. After a while, one of the bags containing an improvised pipe bomb caught fire. This caused a fire that activated the sprinkler system and set off the school's fire alarm. Because of this, the students hiding under the tables were forced to come out and run to save themselves. In the subsequent investigation, authorities discovered that those bags contained two large propane bombs. The plan was supposedly to detonate them while the cafeteria was full of people to cause greater damage, but the bombs did not work as they expected. Because their plan failed, the explosion they expected did not happen. After that last attempt, Harris and Klebold went back upstairs and returned to the library. At 12:06 noon, while the authorities' operation was ongoing, one of the most dangerous phases of the rescue mission began. A SWAT team entered the eastern part of the school. Their main objective was to reach the source of the gunfire and stop whoever was responsible for the attack. At the same time, another tactical team entered the building through a window. On that floor, near the cafeteria, their mission was to evacuate as many students and teachers as possible. As they carefully advanced through the hallways, they found hundreds of students and teachers locked inside the classrooms. Many had placed barricades on the doors and remained silent while waiting for help. They didn't know where the perpetrators were or if it was safe to come out. The police began evacuating them one by one. In small groups, they carefully guided the students out of the building. As the operation continued, they swept through every room, making sure no one was left behind and immediately assisting those who needed medical attention. Their progress was slow but organized.
17 students right off of the lunchroom area. Okay, tell them to stay where they are. Stay locked down.
They are carefully securing each part of the school while expanding the safe area for the survivors. Outside the campus, police vehicles are waiting to take the students away from danger. Only a few students are loaded into each vehicle before they are brought to a safer location. As more people were rescued, parents and authorities began to see a glimmer of hope amid the tragedy that shook the entire community. The survivors come out one by one, and for the first time since the attack began, authorities are slowly starting to regain control of the situation. At 3:22 in the afternoon, more than 3 hours after the attack began, the police finally entered the library. There, they were met with a heartbreaking and devastating scene. In different parts of the room were victims who had been killed and injured during the attack. As the search continued, officials also found the bodies of Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. At 3:22 in the afternoon, more than 3 hours after the attack began, the bodies of Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold were found. At that point, it was finally confirmed that they were the two perpetrators behind the tragedy. Both of them had entered carrying many weapons and were surrounded by explosives they brought to the school. According to the police investigation, both of them died from gunshot wounds they inflicted on themselves. As the operation inside the school was gradually coming to an end, the full extent of the devastation was becoming clear across the country. The incident at Columbine High School was reported on television. Emergency broadcasts soon began during the attack, and the incident at Columbine High School became the main news on television. Emergency broadcasts followed as authorities tried to inform the public about the details gathered by the police. In the initial report, some witnesses said that two armed individuals wearing long black coats were responsible for the attack at the school. However, because the situation was still chaotic, much of the early information that came out was not yet fully verified. As the investigation continued, searching the building was slow and dangerous because of the weapons and explosives left in various parts of the school. The authorities had to make sure that each room was safe before entering it. Meanwhile, hundreds of students ran out of the campus during the attack. With so many injured, it was hard to believe that the people responsible for the attack were their classmates whom they saw every day at school. After the gunfire stopped, the community began to grasp what had happened. News helicopters circled for hours as the nation followed the unfolding details of the attack. At the same time, various rumors and speculations about the attackers began to spread. There were reports linking them to a group known as the Trenchcoat Mafia, a group of students who often wore long black coats. Because of the chaotic flow of information, the media and public interest in the case grew even more. Many people that afternoon were asking the same thing. How did it happen that more than an hour after the attack started, people kept asking the same thing? How did this happen? And why did no one notice? How could two students commit such violence? While investigators searched for answers, they also began to examine past actions, writings, photos, and other materials that could possibly shed light on the motives of the perpetrators. In different parts of Littleton, parents gathered at designated reunification centers, including schools, libraries, and community centers. These places were filled with anxiety and fear. Some parents were crying while waiting for news about their children. Others were desperately searching for their names on the long lists posted on the walls and doors. Names were posted one by one as time passed after the event started, while others were desperately searching for their names on the lists posted on the walls and doors. The names of students who had been found and evacuated gave waiting families a little hope. For some, just seeing their child's name on the list brought immense relief. But for others, the hardest part of their lives was just beginning. That day didn't just change Columbine High School. It changed the entire community of Littleton. It left a scar that would remain in America's memory for many years. Many parents waited for hours at the reunification centers. They tightly held the lists of names while repeatedly checking the faces of each evacuated student. Their only wish was to see their child come out safely. For some, that long-awaited moment finally came, but for others, it never came. At those times, many of the victims had not yet been removed from the school. As the investigation continued, the first reports about the extent of the tragedy came out. In total, 15 people lost their lives in the incident: 12 students, 1 faculty member, and the 2 perpetrators. According to investigators, it was clear that the attack was not sudden. Evidence emerged showing that this was planned for a long time. As reports of those who lost their lives reached their families one by one, another painful chapter of the tragedy began. This is the chapter where parents have to face the reality that their children will never come home again, a kind of loss that is hard to describe and even harder to accept. For those who survived, the days that followed felt like a dream they couldn't wake up from. Many said they couldn't immediately understand everything that happened. There was confusion. There was silence after the sirens and chaos. And above all, there was the heavy truth that there were classmates and friends they would never see again. Some survivors remembered how they witnessed their classmates being hit while they were just hiding inside the library. Those scenes became memories they would carry for the rest of their lives. Many of them experienced intense anxiety, trauma, and emotional problems while trying to process what they had gone through. According to some, no one will ever forget what happened at Columbine. The damage it left was so deep, not only for the direct victims, but for the entire community. Even the teachers found it hard to return to normal life. Some of them asked themselves if they could ever go back to the classroom again, if they could still teach after witnessing such a terrible tragedy. For many, Columbine is a community that once believed this kind of violence would never happen to them. But that incident showed that no place is completely safe from such tragedies. In the days that followed, memorials began to appear almost immediately in different parts of Littleton. Fences, schools, and public places became shrines of mourning. They were filled with flowers, candles, letters, photos, and messages for the victims. Thousands of people also attended vigils and gatherings to pay their respects to those who lost their lives. It was not only the Columbine community who sent messages for the victims. Thousands of people also attended vigils and gatherings to pay their respects and mourn. The whole of America also joined in the search for answers as to why all of this happened. As the investigation continued, a clearer but more disturbing picture of the case gradually emerged. Authorities discovered that the attack was not the result of a sudden decision or impulse. Instead, it had been planned for a long time by Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. For many months, they carefully built their plan. They searched for weapons, made improvised explosive devices, and prepared each detail of how they would carry out the attack. As more evidence was discovered, it became increasingly clear that what happened in April 2019 was not an accidental outburst of anger. It was a carefully thought-out plan. It was prepared and carried out over a long period of time, a fact that makes the tragedy that shook Columbine and the whole of America even heavier. The evidence discovered after the tragedy completely changed the perspective of Dylan Klebold's family. According to his mother, before she saw the investigation documents, she couldn't believe that her son was capable of deliberately taking lives. In her mind, she was searching for another explanation. She was hoping that maybe it was all just an accident. Maybe something unexpected happened. Or maybe it was a misunderstanding that got out of control. But eventually he realized that those thoughts were just part of intense denial. A natural way of thinking to protect oneself against a very painful truth. As the investigation deepened, authorities discovered that the preparations of the two perpetrators were not just about obtaining weapons. They discussed their plans repeatedly, experimented with different equipment, and recorded their thoughts in journals, video recordings, and other personal documents. These materials gave investigators a clearer picture of how their plan was formed over a long period of time. When Dylan's mother personally saw the official report from the sheriff's department about what happened, she said it felt like a bucket of cold water was poured over her. The details were completely different from anything she expected to hear. In the first days after the tragedy, she was still hoping that her son was not responsible for everything he was being accused of. But as the evidence was presented one by one, it became impossible for her to ignore the truth. This was another blow for her. It was as if the grieving process started all over again. The child she once mourned was the image of the son she had in her mind. What was in her mind was the child she knew as kind and loved by the family. But when she saw the things she hadn't noticed before, she had to face a more painful reality. A reality that changed everything she believed about her own son. As the investigation continued, the authorities also began interviewing the families and people close to the two perpetrators. At the same time, more information surfaced about what they did before the attack. Investigators discovered that one of them posted violent writings and content on the internet. There were also online posts showing deepening anger and dark thoughts that went largely unnoticed before the tragedy. One of the most disturbing discoveries was a message posted in an online chat room on the morning before the attack. In that message, he wrote words indicating that it was, allegedly, his last day on Earth. According to the public statements made by Dylan Klebold's mother, she believes that there were times when her son experienced intense thoughts about ending his own life. In some of the things Dylan wrote before the tragedy, there are parts where he shows his intense emotional suffering and his desire to escape from the problems he was dealing with. From his mother's perspective, Dylan may have seen joining Eric as a way to end everything. However, she also emphasized that this does not remove the responsibility for her son's decisions. One of the most important pieces of evidence discovered by investigators was the so-called basement tapes. These are a series of videos secretly recorded by Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold in the months leading up to the attack. In these recordings, they speak directly to the camera about their plans, anger, and views on the world. The videos provided a clearer picture of how they thought about and prepared for what they were going to do. The recordings also showed that they had long included in their plans the possibility that they would not survive after the attack. Because of this, it became even clearer to the investigators how extensive and serious their preparations were. In the following years, many experts, researchers, and people close to the case tried to understand what drove the two young men to commit such violence. According to Dylan's mother, she believes that her son had personal problems that gradually worsened over time. She does not consider this a sufficient reason for Dylan's decisions. Instead, for her, it is part of a more complicated picture that includes personal problems, wrong decisions, and times when they failed to see or understand the warning signs. He described it as a problem that gradually worsened until it reached the most dangerous level. In his view, both Dylan and Eric had their own problems that were not properly addressed, which eventually contributed to the tragedy they caused. As more details emerged, investigators also discovered that many warning signs were ignored before the attack. Their writings, their videos, their statements on the internet, and their growing fascination with violence. All of these became part of a bigger picture that was only seen when it was already too late. The case also showed how important it is to identify and address serious mental health issues, emotional distress, and other warning signs early on. May 22, 1999. More than a month after the tragedy, graduation day for Columbine High School's class of 1999 finally arrived. Usually, graduation is a day of joy and celebration, a day to honor the achievements of the students and mark the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. But that year, the atmosphere was different. Many were quiet. It was palpable. The absence of those who should have been there was deeply felt. There were empty seats that served as reminders of the lives that were lost. And even though the community tries to move on, the weight of what happened on April 20 still lingers in the air. The graduation, which should have been filled with joy, was instead shrouded in sadness, remembrance, and mourning. It was a day that reminded everyone of how great the impact of the tragedy at Columbine High School was, not only on the school, but on the entire Littleton community. Because of what happened on April 20, 1999, many of the survivors began to change their outlook on life. For some, it served as a reminder that every day is important and should not be wasted. They learned to value every moment, every word, and every person who is important in their lives. The simple things that once seemed ordinary gained a deeper meaning after the tragedy. The events at Columbine left a deep mark, not only on the school community, but on the whole of America. After the incident, many schools in the country began to review and change their security policies. Lockdown drills were implemented, security measures were strengthened, and new plans were made on how to respond to active threats inside the school. Columbine became an important lesson for schools, police, and communities across the country. At the same time, a widespread debate also erupted about gun laws, access to firearms, and the measures that could be taken to prevent similar tragedies. Many citizens, groups, and families of the victims called for changes to reduce the risk of mass shootings in the future. But for the survivors, the impact of the tragedy did not end on that day. For many, the painful, long, and more difficult struggle was just beginning. Some suffered from severe trauma and PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. According to one survivor, sometimes the emotional impact is even harder than the physical injuries they suffered. For many years, he carried the fear and memories left by the attack every single day. He experienced nightmares, panic attacks, and severe anxiety that could be triggered by simple things. Sometimes, just the sound of a loud explosion or an engine backfiring was enough to bring back memories of what happened at Columbine. There were also times when simply seeing someone dressed in black would cause intense fear and a panic attack. In the first years after the tragedy, when that happened, it was almost impossible for him to return to normal for the rest of the day. If he was in a store and his trauma was suddenly triggered, he would be forced to go home immediately. For him, the whole day was over. The wounds left by Columbine are not all visible to the eye. Many of the survivors still carry memories that will never be erased. But despite this, many also found the strength to move forward. Some began to speak publicly about their experiences. Others became part of campaigns and discussions about school safety, mental health awareness, and other issues related to preventing violence. They used their experiences to help others and to warn about signs that should not be ignored. Over time, many of the survivors used their experiences to advocate for change. But as they try to heal, the shadow of Columbine still remains. In the following years, there were more horrific attacks in different parts of America. For some survivors, every report about another school shooting brings back painful memories. There are times when they can't watch the news because of its intense emotional impact on them. As the years go by, the pain is not as intense as before, but the sadness remains. And with every new incident, they remember that the effects of these kinds of tragedies do not end when the media's attention is gone. After a few weeks, the news may move on to another topic. But for the victims and their families, their lives have been changed forever. In February 2025, Anne Marie Hochhalter, one of the survivors of Columbine who suffered life-changing injuries, passed away. For many years, she faced complications from the wounds she sustained during the attack. Those who knew her described her as a person full of light, inspiration, and a positive outlook on life. She was also known as someone who was not afraid to speak out about issues that mattered to her. Because of the injuries she sustained at Columbine, she lost the ability to walk. And just a few months after the tragedy in 1999, her mother also passed away. Another major hardship in her life. Despite all of this, she remained strong and became an inspiration to many people for many years. But above all, she was a person who touched the lives of so many people and served as a symbol of resilience in the face of great trials. Her passing marked her as the 14th victim of the Columbine tragedy. A sad reminder that the impact of that day did not end when the gunfire stopped. Instead, the wounds left by the attack continued for many years, affecting the lives of the survivors, their families, and the entire community. His story reminds us that the consequences of a tragedy can last for decades, and for some, the struggle continues long after the event itself has ended.